1939, Germany plunges Europe into war by breaking their promises for peace and marching into Poland. By the end of 1940, though, Britain is the only great power still standing against a seemingly invincible German juggernaut. On the surface, the war's opening phase seems like Hitler's crowning achievement. But did the first 16 months of World War II actually lay the groundwork for his ultimate defeat? The German invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939 is usually considered the start of World War II. But it also started as a regional war between neighbors. The Polish Second Republic declared independence in 1918, and its western borders were established by the Treaty of Versailles, although violent clashes in some former German regions continued until 1921. Its eastern borders, though, were only made official after a bitter war against Soviet Russia, which also ended in 1921. But neither Germany nor the Soviet Union are satisfied with the new order. They both view the Polish state as an illegitimate creation of the Versailles system that they both resent, and both maintain claims on Polish territory. Even so, Warsaw signs non-aggression pacts with Moscow in 1932 and with Berlin in 1934. This fragile balance, however, masks the intentions of Poland's neighbors. German dictator Adolf Hitler has long viewed imperial expansion to the east as essential to gaining Libra for the German people, and he and many other Germans want to recover the land ceded to Poland in 1919. Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin's intentions are the subject of some debate. Some historians argue that he wants to reconquer the lands of the Tsarist Empire. Others that he wants to extend the Soviet border as far to the west as possible as a security buffer, or even that he's just looking to seize any territory at all if given the chance. Regardless, the Soviet regime views Poles as an enemy, and they particularly target ethnic Poles in the USSR during the Great Terror of 1937-38. In 1938, Nazi Germany annexes part of Czechoslovakia after the Munich Agreement, and the Polish government also takes a small piece of Czechoslovakia with German consent. Warsaw had considered war with the USSR the most likely threat, but after Munich, Germany sets its sights on Poland. German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop insists on a solution to what he calls the German-Polish question, including German claims on the Free City of Danny, formerly part of Germany, but overseen by the League of Nations and administered by Poland. Berlin also accuses Warsaw of disrupting agreed German access to its exclave province of East Prussia, and local German Nazis and Danny cause unrest. The semi-authoritarian Polish government led by Prime Minister Felton Swakowski looks to France and Britain for help, and both governments promise to support the Poles if Germany attacks. By summer 1939, war seems imminent to Polish military commander Marshal Edward Śmigły. We want to exhaust all possible efforts for a peaceful solution to the Danny question. But if Germany insists on its annexation plan, Poland will fight, even if alone and without allies. The entire nation to the last man and woman is ready to fight for Poland's independence. And if we say we're going to war because of Danny, it is a fight for our independence. Hitler doesn't think that Britain and France will keep their word, but he doesn't want to risk a two-front war either. So the German government offers the Soviets a deal. Even though the Nazis and Soviets are bitter ideological enemies from the opposite sides of the political spectrum, they share a common goal of overturning the existing order in Europe and expanding their empires. On August 23, 1939, they shock the rest of Europe and sign a non-aggression pact, sometimes called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, after the two foreign ministers. In a secret protocol, they also agreed to divide Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Germany can do as it likes in the former Czechoslovakia, Western Poland, and Lithuania, while the USSR has free reign in Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Eastern Poland, and Bessarabia. The stage is set for war. In late August, the Germans stage 4 false flag incidents along the border to provide a pretext for invasion. Men of the SS security service under Reinhard Heydrich dress in Polish uniforms and raid a radio station at Lewitz, a customs post, a railway station, a gamekeeper hut, and a few other targets. The Germans bring with them 4 men from the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and a local Polish sympathizer whom they put in Polish uniforms, murder, and photograph as supposed evidence of failed Polish aggression. The fact that most of these false flag ops don't work as planned is overshadowed by the coming invasion. The German plan case White calls for an attack from north and south. 2 German armies will close the Danny Corridor and move south from East Prussia towards Warsaw, and 3 southern armies will move north towards the Polish capital and east towards Lviv, today's Lviv. The German alliance Slovak state allows German troops to use its territory. German armored and motorized divisions advancing with the support of the Luftwaffe will then trap Polish forces west of the Vistula. To carry out Case White, the Germans assemble 1.5 million men, 3,200 armored vehicles, and 2,000 planes. Most of their 2,000 tanks are smaller Panzer Is, 2s, or Czech models. Just 300 are modern Panzer III ES or 4s. Of 50 divisions, 6 are armored and 4 motorized. The rest rely on horse-drawn transport. 3 Slovak divisions will also join. Opposing this force are about 1 million Poles in 38 infantry divisions, 1 motorized, and 11 cavalry brigades. They have 1,100 armored vehicles, but nearly all are small or outdated models. They lack anti-tank weapons, and the Air Force is weak with about 750 older models. At the urging of Britain and France, Poland delayed mobilizing for fear of provoking Germany. So by September 1st, only about half of Polish units are in their assigned defensive positions. The Polish plan is based on difficult choices since their forces are weaker than the enemy. Concentrating their forces risks leaving valuable territory and resources unprotected, while defending the whole border means they'll be too thin to stop the enemy. Polish High Command decides to risk an all-round defense in the hope of resisting long enough for their French allies to launch their promised offensive 15 days after French mobilization. The morning of September 1st, Hitler falsely accuses the Polish army of firing onto German territory and announces that Germany is, quote, returning fire. German forces stream across the border with the tank divisions aiming to break through and penetrate as far and as fast as possible to surround and isolate slower Polish forces into pockets. Aircraft like the Ju-87A ground attack planes hit Polish positions, logistics, and communications hubs to paralyze enemy command and control. Other German bombers hit Polish cities, not only for military purposes, but also to terrorize the civilian population. Some of the first shots of the war are fired by the German warship Holstein, which is supposed to be visiting Danig on a friendship cruise, but instead supports the German assault on the peninsula of Westerplatten. The surprised garrison of 180 Polish troops resists furiously, but they're outnumbered and there's no hope of relief, so they surrender. September 7th. Although the Germans quickly break through Polish lines in many places, many Polish units resist fiercely and hold up the German advance. The cavalry division holds up German tanks at Mora. And at Kroanty, one action gives rise to a persistent myth of Polish cavalry senselessly charging German tanks. What really happens is that German tanks surprise a Polish unit of Ulan Lancers that is advancing to attack a German infantry unit, inflicting heavy casualties. An Italian war correspondent speaks to German tankers the next day, and his dramatized defense of Warsaw. The speed of the German advance shocks the Poles, and many Polish formations are trapped in pockets of varying sizes. These usually resist as long as they can, but shortages of food and ammunition and relentless air attack mean they can't hold out for long. As the Polish army prepares to defend the capital on September 3rd, Britain and France declare war on Germany. Many Poles see this as their only chance for salvation. And citizens like Helena Regulska celebrate. We embraced each other, kissed, hugged, and danced. Long live England. Now we won't die in this unequal fight. A few hours later, France declared war on Germany. In Warsaw, there's enthusiasm and demonstrations. Still, the promised French offensive should only start in 2 weeks. In the meantime, the Germans take Krakow without a fight on September 6th. On the 8th, German spearheads reach the outskirts of Warsaw, though Polish troops prevent them from entering. A German report reflects their difficulties entering the capital. It was pointless to try to break through here. The brigade ordered a retreat. Slowly, with their turrets facing rearwards, the tanks pulled back, giving each other covering fire. Riflemen, some of whom had panicked and retreated too early, blocked their path. On the tanks' hulls lay dead and wounded. The order to retreat didn't reach many of the tanks, and they were left behind. On the 9th, Polish forces in a large pocket west of Warsaw launch a major counterattack at the Battle of the Bura. They try to push the Germans back to break out and to prevent the encirclement of Warsaw. The fighting is the heaviest of the entire campaign. And although the Germans divert troops away from Warsaw and some Polish units do escape to the capital, German pressure on the ground and relentless air attack reduce the pocket in about a week. Around the same time, the Germans break the last Polish defenses in the north at Wisna. Day by day, more Polish pockets surrender and German forces surround Warsaw by September 15th. The Germans demand the city's unconditional surrender, but the Poles refuse. The Germans worry that the Poles might try to form a new line in the east between Brest-Litovsk and Lwów. But German forces reach Lwów first. Meanwhile, German planes relentlessly pound Polish cities, including the capital. On Grochow Boulevard, which was jammed with traffic, German fighters hunted from 100 meters up and fired with machine guns on refugees, military units streaming into Warsaw, and women on their way to pick potatoes in the fields. The corpses and horse carcasses lay in the street until evening since another attack might start at any moment. With Warsaw surrounded and the Polish army in tatters, Poland's faint hopes rest on the promised French offensive. But instead of a full-scale attack on Germany's weakly defended Western Front, the French and British do little. The French make a limited advance for a few days, then withdraw to the Maginino Line. Instead, on September 17th, the Soviet Union joins the fighting on the German side. From the German point of view, Soviet entry can't come soon enough. They're so concerned about Britain and France that Berlin had been asking Moscow to join from the first days of September. Although Moscow allows the Germans to use naval facilities at Morman and radio stations for the Luftwaffe in Minsk, they need time to mobilize troops and end their border conflict with Japan in Mongolia. The Vox quicker than expected advance, though make Stalin worry that his new partner might not respect their secret deal. The Soviets also want to avoid being seen as full aggressors. So they prepare pretexts in a note that Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov hands the Polish ambassador in Moscow. The Polish government has disintegrated and no longer shows any sign of life. This means that the Polish state and its government have in point of fact ceased to exist. The Soviet government also cannot view with indifference the fact that kindred Ukrainian and Belarusian people who live on Polish territory and who are at the mercy of fate should be left defenseless. The reality that the Polish government and army both still exist and are resisting the Germans makes little difference. Red Army orders urged the troops to aid the workers and peasants rebelling against their Polish landlords. But there is no such rebellion. Two Red Army fronts with about 470,000 men, 4,000 tanks, 5,500 guns, and 2,000 aircraft cross the border. Facing them are 350,000 Polish troops, but many of them are unarmed reservists, and there's little in the way of heavy weapons. Many Poles are taken by complete surprise, and some, like Janusz Badak, wonder whether the Red Army might in fact be coming to help them. Two men shined flashlights in our eyes while others surrounded us. I was astonished to see Soviet military uniforms and hear the Russian language. We were still a long way from the border. I couldn't imagine what Soviet soldiers were doing on Polish territory, and could only hope that the mighty Red Army had come to fight the Nazis and expel them from Poland. I wanted to express my joy at seeing them, but someone ordered us to put up our hands. Some locals, mostly Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Jews, do welcome the Soviets in the hopes they'll be better treated than by the Polish authorities. Fighting is limited, though Polish troops fend off Soviet tanks at Grodno using Molotov cocktails and machine guns for 2 days. At Lwów, which is already besieged by the Wehrmacht, but in the Soviet zone, German and Soviet commanders briefly consider a joint assault before the Germans withdraw. On September 22nd, in a show of cooperation, German and Soviet troops hold a joint parade in Brest-Litovsk, complete with victory arches decorated with swastikas and red stars. This was the same city where Soviet Russia and Germany had signed a peace treaty in 1918. The ceremony is observed by Generals Heinz Guderian and Simon Kosen, who is Jewish, and they chat together in French. London and Paris are appalled by Soviet actions, but they don't feel they can risk war with the USSR on top of war with Germany. British ambassador in Moscow, William Speeds, is blunt. I do not myself see what advantage war with the Soviet Union would be to us, though it would please me personally to declare it on Mr. Molotov. As the German and Soviet armies take control of most of Poland in the occupied zones, they quickly impose a reign of terror. Since the Soviets and Germans insist the Polish state does not exist, they consider Polish citizens under occupation to have no rights or protections. The Nazis consider Slavic Poles and Polish Jews, who make up 10% of the population, as subhumans who should be enslaved, killed, or driven away. SS Commander Reinhard Heydrich emphasizes that the first priority is to eliminate Polish elites. The people must be shot or hanged immediately without trial. The little people we want to spare, but the nobles, priests, and Jews must be killed. But it wasn't just the SS that committed atrocities from the very start of the campaign in Poland. Some ethnic German civilians living in Poland formed militias and joined in the crime, and Special SCOP targeted Polish Jews and intellectuals for executions. In Przemyśl, for example, Anatopa shoots 500 Jews in mid-September. Regular Wehr units also killed Polish prisoners and civilians. Army commanders like Franz Halder will later say that the Nazi leadership is clear about the purpose of the war. It was the intention of the Führer and Göring to destroy and exterminate the Polish people. In the town of Częstochowa, 42nd Division troops massacre about 1,000 civilians, including 150 Jews, on the false pretext that civilians are firing on German troops. Helena Spielman witnesses the killings. On the town square were gathered several thousand people, men, women, and children. The whole square was surrounded by German soldiers who held their rifles at the ready. They thoroughly searched the Polish and Jewish men. If they found a razor blade, shaving knife, or pocket knife, the man in question was brought to a nearby air raid trench and immediately shot. The Germans carry out similar massacres elsewhere on the pretext of mostly imaginary partisan action by civilians. In all, the Germans execute 12,000 to 15,000 Poles during the 5-week campaign, not including civilian victims of the aerial bombing. On October 4th, Hitler announces an amnesty for all Germans who've committed war crimes in Poland. The Soviets also commit crimes in their zone. They shoot or imprison Polish community leaders, officers, businessmen, wealthy farmers, landowners, and civil servants. Soviet authorities deport many to camps in the Soviet Union. They frequently shoot prisoners of war. After the brief battles of Grodno and Lwów, Soviet troops execute several hundred Polish defenders. During the campaign, some Poles turned violent against their ethnic German fellow citizens. In one incident at Budge, enraged Poles killed 223 ethnic Germans, and the overall total might be as high as 6,000. As the Germans and Soviets impose their rule in occupied territory, Polish military resistance enters its final phase. In late September, there are only a few Polish pockets still holding out at Modlin Fortress, Kotsk, and Warsaw. Polish government flees to neutral Romania and then to France. The Germans try to capture Warsaw as soon as possible, but they've assigned too few units for the task, and they're inexperienced in urban warfare. The 180,000-man Polish garrison is low on ammunition and heavy weapons, but they fight back using the urban landscape, ruins, and street barricades for cover. Elements of the 10th German Division are held up by a group of young Polish soldiers. About 30 military cadets, gunners, dug in a field gun and sat in a cellar next to it. If one of our tanks or assault guns appeared, a crew jumped up and fired until they were killed. Then came the next ones. This single gun demolished 3 German assault guns and 1 field gun. The Luftwaffe bombs the city heavily, targeting power stations, the water system, and electricity infrastructure. There was no power and no water. Civilian Helena Regulska recalled the scene. Above us raged an inferno. One plane after another dove down onto us, and every time it seemed to us that this time we'd be hit. This expectation of death made our hearts stand still. September 25th marks the biggest aerial bombing attack in history to that point, with 370 German planes dropping incendiary bombs to start fires. Overall, the bombing kills about 40,000 Warsaw residents. Warsaw Mayor Stefan Starinsky broadcast desperate radio appeals to Britain and France. And you, our allies, who promised to help and swore you would stand by us no matter what. What are you doing? That is what the dead and dying are asking. By September 26th, though, his tone changes. For the last time, I call on our allies. I am not asking for help. There's no time for that anymore. I demand revenge for the churches reduced to ashes, for the tears and blood of the innocent dead, for the suffering of those torn apart by bombs, burned up by phosphorus shells, or suffocated in collapsed cellars and bunkers. May all broadcasters who hear us, especially the French, repeat to the entire world, Warsaw is fighting. Poland is not yet lost. But the siege of Warsaw soon ends. Water shortages, the risk of disease, and the hopeless military situation forced the Poles to surrender on September 28. Soon after, Modlin Fortress also gives up, though the pocket at Kotsk holds out until October 6, marking the end of organized Polish resistance. The Germans hold a victory parade in Warsaw, filmed by well-known director Leni Riefenstahl. The remnants of the Polish army try to escape to neutral neighbors, and between 80 and 200,000 men succeed. On the way, some units like that of Captain Romeo Al-Kalitski run into armed opposition from unfriendly civilians in an echo of the interethnic fighting of 20 years before. We march at night. There is no contact with the enemy. On the way, Ukrainian bands in villages Staipan, Manvish and Ratna were liquidated. The Polish campaign is over and Nazi Germany and the USSR achieve their immediate goals. Stalin will soon say their friendship is, quote, sealed in blood. They also agree to modify their zones of control. Germany gets more of Poland and more Soviet raw materials needed for the war with France and Britain. While the Soviet Union can now include Lithuania in its sphere of influence, Moscow soon offers Vilos to Lithuania, which accepts. The Germans also give a small piece of Polish territory to the Slovak state. The speed and destruction of the German victory is exploited by Nazi propagandists to create the image of an all-powerful VE and contributes to the myth of Blitzkrieg as a deliberate doctrine. In reality, the German high command feels the army had been rushed into war by the political leadership before it was ready and judges its performance and munition stocks to be insufficient for war with Britain and France. The German military suffers about 15,000 dead, 30,000 wounded, and 3,400 missing. They also lose 217 tanks, nearly 10 of those deployed. The Red Army loses about 750 dead and 1,800 wounded. Polish losses are much higher. In the military, between 70 and 120,000 dead, 130,000 wounded, and 700,000 prisoners taken by the Germans, and 220,000 prisoners taken by the Soviets. Between 1 and 200,000 Polish civilians are killed. As much as Poland's people have suffered during the dual invasion, the horrors of the occupation, both on the German and Soviet side, will soon bring much worse. But Soviet dreams of territorial expansion don't end with Poland. As the Polish operation comes to an end, Soviet forces gather for another offensive into the rugged wintry frontier with Finland. November 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union have conquered Poland, and Germany is at war with France and Britain. Moscow is free to do as it pleases in Eastern Europe and sets its sights on Finland. But the Winter War will be a nasty surprise for Stalin. In August 1939, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany signed what they call a non-aggression pact. It includes a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence where each power can act as it sees fit. As planned, they invade Poland together in September. And while Germany turns west in October, the Soviet Union forces the governments of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to allow Red Army bases on their territory. Moscow's next target is Finland, formerly a part of the Russian Empire. But the resulting Winter War, or Finnish campaign, as the Soviets call it, will be far longer and bloodier than Moscow expects. Finnish-Soviet relations have been rocky since Finland declared independence from Russia in 1917. Both countries suffered devastating civil wars after World War I. But while the communist Bolsheviks win in Russia, the anti-communists win in Finland despite a younger Joseph Stalin's efforts to help the Reds. Some Finns briefly consider trying to acquire the border region of eastern Karelia where the culture and people are similar, but a 1920 treaty agrees on the pre-917 border, though Finland gains the Arctic port of Paimo. Moscow, though, still regards Finland as hostile to the revolution, and Helsinki fears the Soviets' territorial and ideological intent. In the 1930s, despite a non-aggression pact between the two countries, the Soviets repress ethnic Finns in eastern Karelia who had briefly rebelled in the 1920s and kill many Finnish communists who fled to the USSR after they lost the Civil War. Most historians agree that Stalin wants to reclaim as much as possible of the former Russian Empire and annex Finland as he does to eastern Poland and will later do in the Baltics and Bessarabia. Stalin does worry that the Gulf of Finland and the Baltics are a possible springboard for capitalist powers to threaten the USSR, especially Leningrad, though whether this security fear outweighs his desire for conquest is debated. Stalin and his foreign minister Vyacheslav Molotov present the Finns with their security demands. They tell Helsinki to allow Soviet bases on its territory, especially on the strategic Hanko Peninsula, to give up territory on the Karelian Isthmus, plus islands in the Gulf of Finland and part of the Ribachi Peninsula, and to destroy their border fortifications. In exchange, Finland would receive twice as much mostly uninhabited land in eastern Karelia. The Finnish government under President Kirsti Kallio discussed the Soviet demands. Military Commander Kal Mannerheim wants to compromise while Foreign Minister Ellis Arrow doesn't in case this leads to further Soviet demands. Losing Hanko and the Karelian forts would also make Finland more vulnerable to an eventual attack by the more powerful Red Army. Even though most Finns still think Stalin is bluffing. France and Britain, who are at war with Germany but also oppose Soviet aggression, recommend that the Finns reject the Soviet proposals since, in their view, a Soviet attack is unlikely. Germany tells the Finns to give in, but the Finns don't trust the Germans because of the Nazi-Soviet pact. In the end, talks are broken off with no agreement, though it's unlikely Stalin would be satisfied in the long term, even if Finland had accepted. The Finns hope for support from their Scandinavian neighbors, other great powers, and the League of Nations will deter Soviet invasion. They also believe that if the Red Army does attack, it will take time for it to prepare. The Soviets expect a campaign against Finland will be as quick as that in Poland, and Red Army Chief Commissar Levmel believes Finnish workers and peasants will greet the Soviets as liberators. Moscow considers the Finnish army as weak and outdated and writes off foreign support. Who would help Finland? The Swedes, the British, the Americans? There's no way in hell. There'll be a fuss in the press, moral support, moaning and whining. But troops, aircraft, cannons and machine guns, no. As both sides prepare for war, the Red Army falsely claims the Finns shelled one of its positions on November 26th, and Moscow rejects Helsinki's offer of an international investigation. On November 30th, 1939, Soviet aircraft bomb the Finnish capital and the Winter War begins. Militarily, the struggle seems one-sided. The Finnish army is small as their initial mobilized force is just 250,000 with 500 guns. They're short on artillery, shells, communications equipment, anti-tank guns, and have just 30 tanks. The Air Force has just 114 planes. Meanwhile, the Red Army is undergoing a planned expansion up to 4.5 million men. 425,000 will march on Finland, supported by 2,500 tanks, 2,800 guns, and over 2,000 aircraft. On the other hand, most Finnish unit commanders served in the Tsarist or German armies in World War I or in